Welcome everyone to this new tutorial, and you're going to learn how to create this animation, of course. This animation was highly inspired by this awesome image. It's really cool, and it's created by Robert Sunderlin, or I'm sorry if I mispronounce it, but essentially he creates a very cool art. I highly suggest you also follow him. But I really wanted to create this kind of animation, and this is the finished scene here. It is, of course, a bit different than his, but what we can see here is, a lot of mess. And this tutorial, I also don't want to, dive too deep into every little detail. I kind of just wanna, just show a little bit of workflow, but I'll make sure that you guys can create whatever I created as well. And what you can see here is essentially a big scene. We have our animation happening here, and we have, of course, some visual things that we can see, and we have a whole box around here which kind of keeps the light from the outside getting in. That is because the inside I want to keep dark, and I really want the light from these windows to shine through. So that is the whole reason why I create this box around here. So let's jump into Blender, and we're actually going to use this 3D cube. Very weird, right? So what we're going to do now is we will just delete this top and bottom face, then extrude this face, so scale shift Z to a certain depth, maybe around here, certain thickness, sorry, and then delete these faces. So why do we want to delete these faces? Essentially, why I want to do that is because I want to make sure I can array this over and over, essentially, right? So I can do this maybe times 9, and then the other array as well times 9. But this array modifier, like the second one, should be a factor of 0 in X and then 1 at Y. So here we have a nice grid of walls. So if you want some extra detail on here, you can create some extra edge loops and then just select all of these faces inside here, extrude, scale, shift Z, and then just extrude it a little bit. And this is essentially our wall. So if you want to create some materials on here, which is very easily done, we need to also UV unwrap this, right? So if you go to the UV editing tool and select A, U, and unwrap, you can see that these are our UVs right now. If you go up here inside your show overlays, you can turn on display stretch. So here we can see that everything which is dark blue is not stretched, and everything which goes towards the red, in this case it's green, goes yellow here even, that is very much stretched. And here it's even yellow, yeah, almost red. So this is very much stretched, and we don't want that at all. So we are going to create UV seams to make sure that the stretching is gone. And a little tip with UV seams is that you should use live unwrap, okay? So normally, or back in the time, we always used to select an edge loop, Ctrl E, mark seam, A, U, unwrap, right? And here we can see we have a nice dark blue color, right? And this means that there is no stretching in here. The problem is that every time that sequence just gets boring. So what I highly suggest you do is go in options, inside your 3D view, by the way, in your options, and then live unwrap on the UVs. And now whatever I select and mark seam, I essentially unwrap. One thing, if I select something now, you can see that this whole UVs are gone, so I don't really see the live unwrap. So here, inside your UV editing tab, make sure you go to UV sync selection. And now, the UVs are essentially always turned on, so you can always see them, and I can start to create some extra seams. So if I want a seam here, Ctrl E, mark seam, you can see that it automatically gets unwrapped. This case, this part is here unwrapped, but there's still a lot of stretching, and that is because I probably need another little edge loop there, right? A little seam there. Now, we're gonna do the same here, here, and then all of these edge loops, mark seam, and then let me also seam those off, and it's kind of seems to work. So here we have all of these parts separated, and that is essentially everything that we need. So these are our UVs. And if you go from your UVs to your shading, we can instantly start to create some materials. So in this case, I don't really want to create my own materials. I'm just going to use textures. And I did not really create a whole texture or material library yet, but I highly suggest you guys get the add-on named Node Wrangler. And with the Node Wrangler add-on, you can select a principled shader, click on Ctrl-Shift-T, and then open all of the textures that is in this or whatever texture you're using and do principled texture setup. So now you can see that all of these textures are instantly being set up inside of the principled shader. And that is essentially everything that we need. We have the normal base color, roughness, normal map, displacement map, everything. And of course, we can change everything inside of the mapping node, right? So we can change the size, I mean. So the scale could be 3 by 3 or, 5 by 5, whatever we want. We can change here. And you can see that this, otherwise might consume a lot of time, but in this case, it's quite quick. So very handy texture you can download in the description down below. And now what we want to do is we want to create those metal bars on top. Also very, very simple. I personally like to create just a plane or a cube and scale it around this axis. Make sure it's very small actually. And yeah, you don't have to worry too much how it looks, right? It's more for kind of the shadow that it creates. So if I move this around here, and then a bit to the bottom, here should be good. Then we can just use a nice arrow modifier around the y-axis, of course, not the x-axis. And then you can just put this count all the way up and then move this a bit into place. But you can see, very easy. We can rename this to metal bars. We can rename this cube to the walls, because those are the walls. And of course, the material of the walls should also be wall material. But that is essentially what we need. And then for this material of this metal, we can just create a very simple material. We are not really going to see it. It's just for shadows. So just base color can go quite dark. And we could go, metal up and then roughness a bit up. That's totally fine. But this is essentially everything that you need. Now, we can start to think about our camera position. So if we grab our camera here in our view, so camera to view, we can put our camera in a place where we think will look cool. So in this case, I think this might look decent. Something like this. And then turn this off so we actually cannot move it by accident. So we have a camera here, and of course, everything else is here. So if you want to add a cube, we can start our animation. So this cube, I kind of want to move around here, I think. And if you want to have it perfectly in the middle, you can line it up or find another way to do it. But in this case, I'm just going to line it up. And then we want to create this cube or give this cube a little bit of a different look. So Shift H, scale this down. And then I like to select the top and the bottom face. I to inset, and then delete those faces, and then just select these two edges and then fill this up, right? So fill those edges up. Perfect. So this is going to be our animated cube. Now, if you click on 0, which is your camera, and then click on Alt-H to unhide everything, we can start to animate this. To animate this, you could go to the animation little section, but personally, I want to move this instead of the dope sheet, change this to the timeline, and put the timeline to frame 0. And then, of course, also our little start is going to be at 0. And that is just handy for later on, because I want a animation which takes 100 frames, and then I can copy it over and over. Now, we can animate this cube very easily. The first thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we can barely see it, or not even see it, and that, that's just scaling it down, essentially. Then, with it selected, click on I, and then location and scale, because those are the things that we're going to change. We are not going to rotate it. So location and scale. Then around frame 100, I want to make sure my cube is still selected. Scale it all the way up here, and then move it down. Okay, I'm going to make it a bit smaller, actually. But move it down till around here. Then I lock and scale. So location and scale. So now from frame 0 to a frame 100, it will move which is the location from place, and then scales, it gets bigger. So that's the location and scale. And I personally also made sure that interpolation is at linear. So if you just select all of these keyframes, then click on T, and then interpolation linear, then the interpolation is linear, which just looks better in this animation. So now we have this animation. The thing is, the animation itself, so the location and the scale, are not the only things that change, right? Also the color changes. And what we're gonna do here is we will go to shading, click on new, and we're gonna, just do cube animated as our material. So I was thinking, how can we change the color of this cube depending on the location? And you can just do it with the object info node. Object info node has a little purple dot with the location, right? The problem is purple is vector. So it is the X, Y, and Z axis in this case. And we want to kind of make sure that that is not the case anymore. We want to make sure that we can separate these X, Y, and Z axes. So we are gonna do the separate by X, Y, and Z. And I want to just put this in here and separate it by the Z axis, because that is the important axis in this case. And we will use a color ramp to actually change the color. So the Z axis goes into the vec of the color ramp, and the color goes into the base color of the principal shader. Now, we can see that it is black in this location, and if we move it up, it will become white. We can make this a bit more interesting with maybe blue and red, right? So here we can see that it's red when it's all the way on top and blue when it's on the bottom. Works great, but it changes color too early, right? So if we look down here, if we move it here, we can see that it's already blue around this area. And blue is the lowest that it can get. So if I go lower, it doesn't matter. Blue is the low. So it kind of goes between these color ramps. So red is all the way high and blue is all the way low. But we cannot really change wherever it starts, right? Or how long it takes. And I kind of figured a way out. I'm not sure if this is the perfect way, but it works, okay? And I used a vector math node. So a vector math node. And we can just keep it at add, but I like to play around with this part here, right? So the lowest, which is the Z-axis, I guess, part. And then at 3.6, or actually we need to have it red around frame 5 here. It should be red, and then the lower we go, it should be blue. Perfect, right? So that seems to work quite well. So you kind of are just moving the way that this RGB or this color ramp node is. Essentially, if you just flip this node, then you can kind of see that the higher it is, it will be red, and the lower it is, then it will be blue. So this math node kind of changes that position, which is perfect, but it changes, as you can see, quite quickly from color, right? And I want that time to be longer. So with another math node, with just a normal math node, and put it to divide, you can kind of make this longer if you just put this value up. So now from red to blue will actually take longer, and the higher the value is, the longer it will take. So we have a object info node which takes the location, then this math or vector math node will move this location in a certain position. Then the separate X, Y, and Z will separate it for the Z-axis, because that is the axis that we are going up and down upon, right, with our animation. And then, this divide node makes this color ramp longer or shorter. It might not work totally like that, but that is kind of how I see it. And of course, the color ramp makes sure that we have a certain colors here, right? So blue and red, and you can put any color that you want, by the way. You can just add more, so maybe we want some yellow in here. Totally fine, just do whatever seems cool to you. Now, this whole material was not all the way done for me. I personally also used subsurface modifier. The problem is, inside Eevee, this just doesn't work that great. So I personally went to cycles, make sure I work with my GPU, and here we have our scene inside cycles. So I will go to frame 20 or 25, something like that. And yeah, we have our subsurface all the way on, but you can see that we can barely see anything. That is because there is not enough light in our scene. So if we put this light to, I'm actually going to change it to sun, you can see that, yeah, everything is a bit extreme now, but we are for sure looking through this model, or the light is kind of going through. So we're going to put the strength to maybe 10,000, so it's a bit lower, and use nodes, so we can still play around with the strength, okay? And here we get a decent result. So maybe put it at 5 right now, but we can always change this. Now, if I select this cube again, I can start to play around with this, principled shader, because I don't want this to be white with this red kind of subsurface, right? I actually want it to be the same colors. So the first thing that you want to do is put the color from your color ramp inside the subsurface color. And there is, it's a bit hard to see, but there is still a little bit of a reddish glow. We don't want that. So I am also going to put this subsurface radius all to 1. So let me show you actually what happens. So here you can see we have a little bit of a red subsurface. If I put this all to 1, you can see that now it is white, right? So that's essentially what I want here. And then as random walk, I actually want to put it to Kristen Burley. So that is essentially how we create this material. And you could also add an HDRI if you want. You just go here into world instead of object, then add an environment node or an environment texture, sorry. Then click on open, choose an HDRI. And then you have a nice sky. The problem is I didn't really want to just put a weird sky in here. The problem with this is that it lit up my whole scene. So there are ways around this, of course. You can composite another sky or just put a sky picture on top. But I just thought like HDRI is just as handy. But it just lit up my whole scene. So I actually created a cube. Big cube. So I kind of make this a whole building, I guess. And this cube is essentially just there to keep out the light. So if you move this down and then remove this top face here. Make sure our camera still works, yes. And here you can see that we are keeping the light out. If it reflects too much light, this little outer wall, this cube, then you just create a new material for the cube, new, and just put it to black, okay? And you can also put this roughness all the way up, or even play around with the specularity so it doesn't really reflect anything at all. So that kind of works against any lighting from the outside. And that is essentially everything that I did to light the scene, and this is how you create the scene. The only thing that we need to do now is make sure that this animation is loopable. So I'm just gonna hide everything except this cube here. And what I want to do is I want to just keep copying this animation. So if you just select your cube here, then duplicate the cube, go into the keyframes and move this duplicate keyframes to 20 frames further. So frame 20. Now you can see that now 1, 2, go, right? And then from the duplicate, you can just duplicate it again and move this to 40. Duplicate it again, 60. Duplicate it again, 80. Duplicate it again, 100. And you keep doing this until you reach 200 frames. So here, the last one at 200, and that should be it. So our whole animation is going from frame 100 to 200. And what you can see here is that if we play this, it is totally a loop, right? Awesome. So there is a little bit of a stick up here. We could make this to maybe 199, right? So we probably don't have that little bug in there. And as you can see, that worked perfectly. So 1 frame less will be the perfect loop, let's say. I hope you guys learned from this. Please like and subscribe, it helps me a lot. And also just let me know what you guys want to learn in the comments down below. Sometimes I'm like, I actually don't know what I want to learn. You can even send pictures from Pinterest or whatever, because I really like to recreate stuff that people already made. It's just so interesting to me to kind of go through their mindset. That's it. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.